Heartbreak hits hardest when whispered in crowded rooms. Bradley leaned close, dripping venom, calling her a fat embarrassment. Chloe shattered. She didn't realize Chicago's most ruthless kingpin overheard every cruel syllable. Blood would soon spill because nobody disrespects his future queen. Vengeance wears a bespoke charcoal suit. Chloe Henderson adjusted the sweeping emerald green fabric of her evening gown, trying to ignore the prickling sensation of 100 judgmental eyes. The annual Chicago Heritage Charity Gala was a playground for the city's elite, a glittering sea of champagne, diamonds, and razor-thin socialites. Chloe had never fit into this world. She was a woman of substance, possessing lush, generous curves that defied the rigid size zero expectations of high society. Usually she carried her weight with quiet confidence, wrapping her body in tailored fabrics that celebrated her shape. But tonight that confidence felt paper-thin. She had only come because her public relations firm mandated her attendance. It was supposed to be a straightforward evening of networking. That was before she spotted Bradley. Bradley Hayes, her ex-fiancé, the man who had spent 3 years meticulously dismantling her self-esteem before finally leaving her for a Pilates instructor named Jessica. Chloe tried to pivot toward the exit, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but Bradley had already locked onto her. He detached himself from a group of wealthy hedge fund managers and intercepted her near the towering ice sculpture. "Chloe," Bradley said, his voice carrying that familiar, condescending lilt. His eyes raked over her body, not with appreciation but with cold, clinical disdain. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought this event had a certain standard." "Hello, Bradley," Chloe replied, keeping her voice incredibly level despite the sudden shaking in her hands. "I'm working. Excuse me." He stepped into her path, leaning in close so only she could hear him over the string quartet playing in the background. "Did you really think squeezing into that much silk would hide anything? You've gotten bigger. You're still just as fat. It's honestly embarrassing to even be seen near you." The words felt like a physical strike. They were the exact, venomous echoes of every cruel argument they had ever had behind closed doors, now dragged out into the glittering light of the ballroom. A suffocating heat rushed to Chloe's cheeks. She didn't offer a witty retort. She didn't slap him. The sheer humiliating reality of his cruelty simply paralyzed her. Without a word, Chloe turned and fled. She pushed past a group of laughing socialites, practically running toward the heavy oak doors that led to the venue's historic library. She slipped inside, shutting out the noise of the gala, plunging herself into the quiet sanctuary of leather-bound books and heavy velvet drapes. The library was dark, illuminated only by the faint golden glow of the streetlights filtering through the massive windows. Chloe collapsed into a high-backed leather chair, her composure finally breaking. A choked sob escaped her throat. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, suddenly hyper-aware of every curve, every softness that Bradley so violently despised. "Tears are a terrible waste of beautiful eyes." The voice emerged from the deepest shadows of the room. It was a rich, gravelly baritone, thick with a subtle, unplaceable accent. Chloe gasped. Jumping out of her chair, she peered into the gloom, her heart in her throat. Sitting by the unlit fireplace, previously obscured by the wing-back chair, was a man. As he leaned forward, the dim light caught his features. He was breathtakingly intimidating. He wore a masterfully tailored charcoal suit that strained across broad, muscular shoulders. His jawline looked as though it had been chiseled from granite, and his eyes, dark, predatory, and fiercely intelligent, were locked onto her. I'm so sorry," Chloe stammered, hurriedly wiping her cheeks and smearing her mascara. "I thought this room was empty. I didn't mean to intrude." "You aren't intruding," the man said smoothly, rising to his feet. He moved with the terrifying silent grace of an apex predator. "But you are crying. Why?" It was the sheer authority in his tone that broke down her remaining defenses. He didn't ask it like a polite stranger. He demanded it like a king accustomed to absolute truth. "It's nothing," Chloe whispered, looking down at her emerald dress, suddenly feeling foolish. "Just a bad encounter." The man took a slow step closer. "People do not weep in dark rooms over nothing. Who put that look on your face?" Chloe sniffled, a bitter, self-deprecating laugh escaping her. She felt so small, so utterly broken, that the truth just spilled out of her into the quiet darkness. "My ex," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My ex called me fat." Silence stretched between them. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a heavy, dangerous one. The man stopped moving. His dark eyes swept over her, taking in the full, magnificent slope of her hips, the narrowness of her waist, the generous swell of her chest straining beautifully against the silk. When he looked back up into her eyes, the air in the room felt 20 degrees hotter. "Your ex," the man said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal purr, "is a blind, utterly stupid man. You are not fat, Mirabella. You are a goddess. You are lush and soft and perfect." Chloe's breath hitched. No one had ever spoken to her like that. The absolute certainty in his voice sent a shiver racing down her spine. He didn't think so," she murmured. "He is a peasant who wouldn't know what to do with a queen if she handed him her crown," the man replied, stepping directly into her personal space. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently catching a stray tear on her cheek. His touch was shockingly warm. "Give me his name." "Why?" Chloe asked, mesmerized by the intensity radiating from him. "Because a man who speaks to a woman like you in such a manner needs to be educated," he stated simply. "What is his name?" "Bradley," she breathed out, completely hypnotized. "Bradley Hayes." The man's eyes flashed with something dark and violent, a brief flicker of a raging inferno. "Bradley Hayes. I will remember that. And what is your name, beautiful girl?" "Chloe." "Chloe Henderson." Chloe. He tested the name on his tongue, making it sound like a dark promise. "I am Matteo Vitiello." The name hit Chloe like a freight train. The haze of attraction instantly shattered, replaced by a spike of pure adrenaline. Matteo Vitiello. He wasn't just a wealthy socialite. He was the whispered ghost story of Chicago. The undisputed head of the Vitiello crime family, a mafia boss whose reach extended into every bank, every union, and every dark alley in the Midwest. He was a man who destroyed empires before breakfast, and she had just complained to him about her ex-boyfriend. "You." Chloe took a sudden step back, her eyes widening in sheer panic. "You're Matteo Vitiello." "I am," Matteo confirmed, his expression entirely unreadable. He didn't offer apologies or explanations for his reputation. He simply watched her, assessing her reaction. "I have to go," Chloe stammered, gathering the skirts of her heavy emerald gown. "I shouldn't be here. I'm sorry." Before she could take another step, Matteo's hand shot out, wrapping gently but firmly around her wrist. He didn't hurt her, but the grip was an immovable anchor. "You are not running away, Chloe," Matteo said softly. "Not from me, and certainly not from him. You are going to walk back into that ballroom, and you are going to hold your head high." "Ow, I can't," she whispered, tears threatening to spill again. He will do nothing," Matteo interrupted, his voice laced with cold, absolute authority. "Because you are walking back in there with me." Chloe stared at him, bewildered. Why would the most feared man in Chicago care about a PR executive's wounded pride? But looking into his dark eyes, she saw no pity. She saw an intense, possessive fury that made her stomach flutter in a way that terrified her. Matteo offered his arm. "Shall we?" Slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Chloe slid her arm through his. The muscle beneath his bespoke suit felt like solid iron. When Matteo Vitiello pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped back into the glittering light of the ballroom, the effect was instantaneous. It was as if a great white shark had glided into a pool of brightly colored tropical fish. The laughter near the doorway died abruptly. Conversation sputtered out. Eyes widened. The crowd physically parted, stepping back to create a wide, respectful path for the Mafia kingpin. And on his arm, standing tall despite her shaking knees, was Chloe. She felt the weight of 100 stares, but this time there was no judgment about her size. There was only shock, awe, and a healthy dose of fear. Women who had sneered at her mere moments ago were now staring at the floor, too terrified to meet Matteo's gaze. Matteo walked at a deliberate, agonizingly slow pace. He was making a statement. He was claiming her presence, wrapping her in his terrifying aura of invincibility. Chloe felt a strange, intoxicating rush of power. Beside this man, she wasn't the fat, discarded ex-fiancée. She was untouchable. Matteo's dark eyes scanned the room with predatory precision until they locked onto their target. Bradley Hayes was standing near the grand piano, holding a glass of scotch, laughing with Jessica. Matteo altered their course, steering Chloe directly toward them. As they approached, Bradley casually glanced over. His smug smile instantly vanished. The color drained from his face so rapidly he looked as though he might pass out. Bradley worked in high-stakes corporate wealth management. He knew exactly who controlled the shadow money in Chicago. He knew Matteo Vitiello's face, and he knew the rumors of the blood on his hands. Mr. Hayes, Matteo purred as he stopped smoothly in front of the trembling man. Mr. Vitiello, Bradley choked out, practically dropping his glass of scotch. He didn't even look at Chloe. His terrified gaze was entirely fixed on the mob boss. It is an honor. I didn't know you were attending tonight. I find charity events to be quite educational, Matteo replied, his voice a smooth, deadly drawl. He casually adjusted his cuffs. For instance, tonight I learned that some men in this city lack basic manners. They lack respect. Bradley swallowed hard, sweat suddenly beading on his forehead. I am not sure I understand, sir. Matteo finally turned his head, looking down at Chloe with an expression so tender it made several onlookers gasp in shock. Then his gaze snapped back to Bradley, turning colder than the Chicago winter. I was having a quiet moment in the library, Matteo said softly, the quiet volume forcing Bradley to lean in closer, trapping him, when I found this breathtaking woman weeping in the dark. She told me a rather disturbing story about a cowardly little man who insulted her, a man who called her names. Jessica, Bradley's new fiancée, let out a tiny, frightened squeak and took a step back, desperately trying to distance herself from the impending blast radius. Sir, Bradley stammered, his eyes darting to Chloe in absolute horror. The realization of what he had done and who she was now standing with crashed over him. It was just a misunderstanding, a bad joke. A joke? Matteo tilted his head. I don't hear anyone laughing, Bradley. Do you? No, sir. No, sir. Chloe is under my protection tonight, Matteo stated, his voice echoing clearly in the sudden dead silence of the ballroom. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. And you know what happens to men who disrespect me, don't you, Bradley? Bradley was trembling violently now. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Chloe, I am so sorry. I didn't mean it. Matteo leaned in, dropping his voice to a whisper meant only for Bradley's ears, though Chloe heard every terrifying word. Apologies are just wind. I prefer consequences. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Hayes. It will be the last peaceful one you ever have, Matteo straightened up, his face an emotionless mask. He offered Chloe a faint, reassuring smile. "I believe we've had enough of this party, mia bella. Allow me to escort you home." Chloe could only nod, her mind spinning wildly. Matteo guided her toward the main exit, leaving a completely broken, hyperventilating Bradley behind them. The silence in the room held until the grand doors closed firmly behind them. Once they were in the cool night air, stepping toward Matteo's waiting armored black SUV, Chloe finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that," she breathed, shivering slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off. Matteo removed his bespoke suit jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders. It smelled heavily of expensive cologne and danger. "I disagree." He needed to be reminded of his place at the bottom of the food chain. "Is that it, then?" Chloe asked, looking up at his sharp profile. "You scared him. He's terrified." Matteo paused with his hand on the door of the SUV. He looked down at her, a slow, dark smile spreading across his lips. It was a smile that promised absolute ruin. "Scared him?" Matteo chuckled darkly. "Oh, sweet Chloe." That was just the introduction. Bradley Hayes manages the offshore accounts for the O'Connor family. Tomorrow morning, I am going to freeze his assets. By noon, his firm will be investigated by the feds. By Friday, he won't have a penny to his name, and his dangerous clients will be looking for his head. Chloe stared at him, her heart stopping. "You're going to destroy his entire life." Matteo reached out, his thumb gently tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "I told you, Maya, Bella, I'm going to burn his world to the ground, because nobody makes my woman cry." Sunrise over Lake Michigan brought no warmth to Bradley Hayes. He arrived at the towering glass facade of Harrison and Reed Wealth Management on Wacker Drive at exactly 6 in, his designer shirt already sticking to his back with cold sweat. He had spent the entire night frantically calling his offshore contacts in the Cayman Islands, trying to move the O'Connor family's hidden millions before Matteo Vitiello could strike. Every single call had gone straight to a disconnected tone. He swiped his platinum keycard at the executive elevator bank. The reader flashed an angry, solid red. "Access denied." "Hey, what the hell?" Bradley muttered, slamming his palm against the scanner. "Mr. Butwell Hayes," a voice echoed through the marble lobby. Bradley spun around to find 2 men in standard-issue FBI windbreakers, flanked by building security. Behind them, through the revolving glass doors, 3 black tactical vans were parked haphazardly on the curb. Agents were streaming into the lobby carrying empty cardboard boxes. "We have a federal warrant for your office, your personal hard drives, and all physical ledgers," the lead agent said, holding up a thick stack of paperwork. "Your accounts have been frozen pending a massive federal indictment regarding wire fraud and money laundering." Bradley's knees buckled. "On what grounds?" "This is a mistake. I manage legitimate portfolios." "We received an anonymous data dump at 3 this morning," the agent replied, his face completely devoid of sympathy. "It contained 10 years of encrypted transaction logs detailing your exact funneling methods for the Irish syndicate. You're ruined, Hayes. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." As the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists, Bradley's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. The agent fished it out, glancing at the caller ID. "It says Liam O'Connor," the agent noted dryly. "Should I tell him his money is currently property of the United States Treasury?" Bradley let out a pathetic, strangled sob. The O'Connors were not men who accepted apologies or federal seizures. They were brutal, old-school enforcers who preferred to settle debts with crowbars in shipping containers. Matteo hadn't just taken his job. He had painted a massive, bloody target on his back. By noon, Bradley's picture was plastered across every local news network. He was out on bail, paid for by scraping together the last of his legitimate savings, but he had nowhere to go. When he arrived at his luxury Gold Coast condo, he found Jessica hauling 3 designer suitcases into the back of a waiting Uber. "Jess, wait," Bradley pleaded, running up the driveway. "I can fix this. It's a misunderstanding." Jessica didn't even look at him. She slid on her oversized sunglasses, her mouth pressed into a thin, disgusted line. "Your accounts are locked, Bradley. My platinum card declined at the coffee shop this morning. I'm not going to be the girlfriend of a broke felon who has the Irish mob hunting him down. Do not contact me again." The Uber sped off, leaving Bradley standing alone in the driveway, completely and utterly shattered. In less than 12 hours, Matteo Vitiello had kept his promise. Across the city in Lincoln Park, Chloe Henderson sat cross-legged on her velvet sofa, watching the afternoon news broadcast with wide, disbelieving eyes. The chyron across the bottom of the screen read, "Chicago WFManager, indicted in massive mob sweep." She turned off the television, her hands trembling. Matteo hadn't been exaggerating. He possessed a terrifying, godlike power over the city, and he had unleashed it all because of a few cruel words spoken in a dark library. A sharp knock at her door pulled her from her racing thoughts. Chloe cautiously opened the door to find a massive matte black clothing box resting on her welcome mat, tied with a heavy silk ribbon. There was no delivery driver in sight. She dragged the box inside and carefully untied the ribbon. Pushing back the layers of dark tissue paper, she gasped. Inside was a dress. It wasn't just any dress, it was a custom-tailored masterpiece of deep ruby red velvet. Unlike the garments she usually bought, which were designed to compress, hide, or minimize her lush figure, this dress was engineered to celebrate it. The fabric was heavy and rich, cut to perfectly hug the generous slope of her hips and support the heavy swell of her chest. Tucked into the neckline was a thick, cream-colored cardstock envelope. She opened it with shaking fingers. The handwriting was sharp, elegant, and uncompromising. "A queen should never wear colors meant to blend in. Wear red tonight. My driver will collect you at 8. Number Dissig. Number Dis Essen." The quiet Menning room at the top of the Drake Hotel offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, but Matteo Vitiello wasn't looking at the city. He was looking at Chloe. When she had stepped out of the private elevator, wearing the ruby velvet gown, the air had physically left Matteo's lungs. The dress clung to her every soft, magnificent curve, accentuating the lushness that her fool of an ex had tried to shame her for. She looked powerful, sensual, and utterly breathtaking. "You look..." Matteo stood, stepping forward to take her hand, pressing a warm kiss to her knuckles. "Words fail me, Mia Bella. You are a masterpiece." Chloe felt a deep blush creep up her neck, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from pure, unadulterated desire. "Thank you. And thank you for everything. I saw the news today." Matteo guided her to the table, pulling out her chair. "I told you I handle pests. He will no longer be a concern to you." They spent the next 2 hours dining on imported truffles, rich pastas, and wine that tasted like liquid gold. For a man who controlled the city's underworld, Matteo was incredibly attentive. He asked about her work, her passions, and her dreams, listening to her with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only woman on the planet. He never once looked at her body with anything less than absolute worship. As the dessert plates were cleared, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance of the private suite. The heavy mahogany doors flew open, and 2 of Matteo's massive bodyguards dragged a thrashing, disheveled figure into the room. It was Bradley. His designer suit was torn, his eye was bruised, and he looked completely manic. "Mr. Vitiello, we caught him trying to bribe a service elevator operator," the head guard grunted, tossing Bradley onto the plush carpet. Bradley scrambled to his knees, his eyes darting frantically between Matteo and Chloe. When he looked at Chloe, his jaw dropped. In the ruby dress, standing tall beside the most powerful man in the city, she looked like royalty. She didn't look like the woman he had bullied. She looked like a goddess who could end his life with a single word. "Chloe. Chloe, please," Bradley begged, his voice cracking hysterically. "You have to tell him to stop. The O'Connors are outside my building. They're going to kill me. Tell him to give my money back." Chloe looked down at the pathetic, trembling man on the floor. For 3 years she had let this man dictate her worth. She had starved herself, cried herself to sleep, and hated her own reflection because of his shallow, vicious cruelty. Now, looking at him, she felt absolutely nothing but pity. "Why should I help you, Bradley?" Chloe asked, her voice calm and remarkably steady. "You made it very clear last night that I am just a fat embarrassment." "I was stupid." Bradley wept, crawling slightly forward before a bodyguard stepped on his shoulder, pinning him to the floor. "I was insecure. You were always too good for me. I just wanted to bring you down so you wouldn't leave." "Please, Chloe, you're a good person. Save me." Matteo's expression turned utterly lethal. He slowly stood from the table, walking around to stand directly in front of Bradley. "You do not get to speak to her," Matteo said softly, the quiet volume echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "You do not get to look at her, and you certainly do not get to beg for her mercy." "Please, Bitiello, I'll do anything." "I don't want anything from you," Matteo interrupted. He looked down at Bradley like one looks at dog waste on a pristine shoe. "You had a diamond in your hands, and you treated it like dirt because you were too weak to hold its weight. Now you belong to the wolves." Matteo snapped his fingers. "Take him down to the service alley. The O'Connor brothers are waiting by the loading dock. Tell them his debt is theirs to collect." "No. No, please. Chloe." Bradley screamed as the guards hauled him up by his armpits and dragged him backward out of the room. His terrifying screams echoed down the hallway until the heavy mahogany doors slammed shut, plunging the dining room back into quiet luxury. Chloe stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The reality of Matteo's world was dark, violent, and absolute. Matteo turned to her, the lethal coldness vanishing from his eyes, instantly replaced by a burning, possessive heat. He closed the distance between them, his large hands coming up to gently cup her face. His thumbs brushed against her cheekbones. "Are you afraid of me, Chloe?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Chloe looked up into his dark eyes. She thought about the cruelty she had endured her entire life, the constant pressure to shrink herself to fit into a world that didn't want her. Here was a man who didn't want her to shrink, but he wanted her to take up space. He wanted to set the world on fire just to keep her warm. "No," Chloe whispered, her hands coming up to rest flat against the solid, muscular expanse of his chest. "I'm not afraid." Matteo let out a harsh, relieved breath. He leaned down, his lips brushing softly against hers in a promise of absolute devotion. "Good, because from this night forward, no one will ever disrespect you again. You are my queen, and anyone who makes you feel like you are anything less than perfect will face the fire." He kissed her deeply, sweeping her up into his arms, entirely consumed by the lush, beautiful woman who had finally claimed the heart of Chicago's most ruthless king. Bradley's downfall was as brutal as his insults, proving that true karma is delivered in a bespoke charcoal suit. Do you think Bradley got exactly what he deserved from the ruthless mafia boss and the